Welcome and thank you for joining me. This is Laurie of Laurie's Heirloom Sewing. I wanted to share with all my dandelions, you guys, what I'm doing. And the reason that I'm sharing this in this little quick video is because it occurred to me, even though I wasn't planning on talking about or showing the fabric cutting for the jacket, McCall's M4798. The issue is that there's a lot of little fiddly things that need to be addressed. One is for the sleeves on the jacket main fabric, you'll be cutting out 4 pieces for each sleeve. So you've got 4 huge long pieces of fabric that you're going to need, and then 2 pieces of the underlining, and then there are 2 other pieces within the entire 14-piece package for the jacket where you will be cutting out 2 of the underlining. So it does require a lot of check and double check in the layout and the amount of fabric that you're going to need. I'm glad that I had extra fabric. It just worked out that I needed almost every bit of it, and then I ended up having to order more of the microcheck for the tote. This is the last piece. I mean, this was a massive, huge, almost 3-piece or 3-yard piece of fabric here. So as you can see, I'm like just down to scraps. I'm not like trying to conserve it because I've basically been trying to get rid of this one anyway. But I wanted to point out every single piece will have a grain line that you must follow. So for your sleeve, for example, if this was the sleeve pattern, if this ruler was the sleeve pattern, you're going to have to cant it because your grain line is straight up and down, but the sleeve piece isn't. So be aware that there's really no room for wiggling around in there. Otherwise your sleeves aren't going to fit properly. So this is the grain line. If you've never sewn before, you want to make sure that that is going, you don't want it at an angle like that. In other words, it has to be on the straight grain of your fabric. So that was one of the things that I wanted to definitely point out. And the second thing is I wanted to remind you, you may not need to be reminded, but you're going to want a piece of fabric for the underlining that complements your outer fabric. Darn it, because the Chenille treatment that you will be doing is going to this fabric will be showing through. So I know there's a lot of you cringing right now because I'm doing this cut this way, but when both of your knees are basically blown out and one of your ankles is blown out, you kind of just do what you got to do to get through a day, and this is part of it right here. I can't really move very well, but I'm not here for that. I'm here to talk about cutting out fabric. So this is the last piece of the underlining, and I know at the beginning when I first started talking about this pattern, I told you that I was going to cut it out on the absolute possible largest size. I wasn't going to skimp on the fabric. I was just going to cut it all out. The reason for that is there's a lot of reasons, but the other reason is that the fabric or the pattern itself is has a large seam allowance, because you're going to be sewing all of your fabrics wrong side together and leaving your seams open. What do I mean by that? I mean this. You're going to have your two fabrics. You're going to stitch right here, and this is going to be on the outside, this with a couple other pieces of fabric that we're then going to cut into and then chenille on those seam lines. So that is why there's a large seam allowance, and you want your fabric colors to look good and kind of match up and be pretty. Okay, so this is my contrast fabric, and that was the other thing I wanted to talk about. When you're looking at your layout, the very first thing you see is cutting layouts, jacket, and then it tells you to use pieces 1 through 14. Pieces 1 through 14 are all the jacket pieces minus the applique pieces. So you have your layout options, and you need to be very careful about those sleeves. And then you have the contrast, which I've not done yet. I went straight from the jacket fabric to the underlining layout. And in the underlining layout, you use pieces 1 through 14. So every single solitary piece of jacket pattern is used in the underlining, with the exception of the applique. So now I'm going to go back to the front where contrast 1 is, and it's going to tell me that I'm going to be cutting out of contrast number 1 pieces 1, 7, and 12. But I personally might not want to cut out piece 1, 7, and 12 of contrast 1. I may want to completely redesign this, and that is what I was talking about. So my tip here is, it can be very confusing if you don't make notes and you don't write on, even on the pattern piece, that you have made some changes. So if you have an art book where you write down, your design and what fabric you're using, etc., you're going to also need to draw some lines over here on this page and say, piece number 7. Okay. So if we decide, okay, piece number 7 is, which we can find on the front on the key here, is the lower left front. Okay. If piece number 7 is the lower left front and contrast 1 is this, then I'm good. I don't need to make any changes. I don't need to write anything down. But if I've decided that this is contrast 1 and piece number 7 is the lower left front, then I need to make that change here so I will have something to refer to. I'll need to say, okay, contrast number 1 is the B fabric. Contrast number 2 is the horseshoe fabric. That way I know exactly what I'm looking for, and why did I decide that I didn't want piece number 2 on the outside over here. Well, that's because if I flip this jacket around, I'm going to have, and see, even now I realize there's a mistake. This needs to be 4. And this needs to be 2. Unless I don't care that a 4 and a 4 are meeting up. But if I put this side of the jacket over here on this side, which this is the back of the jacket, then the 4 and the 2 will be a contrast, and the 2 and the 4, or the 3 and the 4 will be a contrast. So I need to decide if that's the way I want things to look. And if it isn't the way I want things to look, then I need to completely redesign what I'm doing, or I need to follow the pattern to the letter. And so that is why I decided not to do a cutting out video of my contrast fabric, because I don't want to confuse anyone. When I do come back, all of these pieces of fabrics will have been cut out. Whether I'm using them the way that the pattern says or the way that I want to do it will be determined as I'm designing and figuring out how I want that to look. So, as confusing as that all probably sounded, basically the idea is you have your pattern, which unfortunately my pattern is in my other room, but this is what it basically looks like right here. And you have to decide, you know, do I want, I'll try to get it out there. Do I want the fabric that they show right there, or do I want to use this fabric? Or do I want to, you know, how do I want this to all end up looking? So, I don't want to confuse you any further. I'm not going to continue blabbing on about it. It's just that at this particular point, all of the pattern pieces have been cut out of the blue microcheck jacket fabric and the white underlining broadcloth. And that's where we stand as of right now. I do appreciate you watching very much. I hope that you have a wonderful day, and hit the like and subscribe if you wish.